over how to solve by factoring. This is when we have a quadratic equation. So one of the first things that you want to make sure you do when you're solved by factoring is set the equation equal to 0. So here's our first example. X squared minus 7x plus 12 equals 0. It's already set to 0, so I can factor right away. What you do is you look at the last term, so general form, ax squared plus bx plus c. C is your constant term. You're going to look at your constant term. You're going to find the factors of 12 that make a sum of your b value. So in this equation, 12 is my c, negative 7, not the x, just negative 7 is your b value. So what are the factors of 12 that, when you add them together, make negative 7? So if I factor 12, you can go through the list. 1 times 12, 2 times 6, 3 times 4. So 3 and 4 make 7. Then what you do is you check your signs. So because I have a negative and then a positive, two numbers multiply to 12. They're going to have to either both be negative or both be positive. Because this is negative, you're going to have two negative numbers. And if you check your factors, negative 3, negative 4, when you add that together, you get negative 7. So to factor, we're just going to rewrite x squared minus 7x plus 12 with these factors, x minus 3, x minus 4, still equal to 0. Then we're going to use a zero product property, so anything times 0 equals 0. So we want to make this set equal to 0. X minus 3 equals 0. We want to make this set equal to 0. X minus 4 equals 0. And then you solve for x. In this case, add 3 to both sides. X equals 3. And in this case, add 4 to both sides. X equals 4. So we use solve by factoring with a leading coefficient of 1. It was already set to 0. I found my factors, they add to negative 7, and here are my two solutions. Now click stop. Okay, here's another example. Solve by factoring. First thing you gotta do is make sure that your equation is set equal to 0. So this equation, 2x squared plus x equals 6, is not set equal to 0. So I'm gonna move the 6 to the left side. So I get 2x squared plus x minus 6 equals 0. Then the next thing you want to do when you're going to factor is you are going to look to see if you have a leading coefficient of 1. In this case, we don't. We have a leading coefficient of 2. So I can't just factor 6 to get the middle term like in the last example. So I'm going to take my leading coefficient a, which is 2, and I'll multiply that by c, my constant term, negative 6. So 2 times negative 6, and this is negative 12. And then I need to find the factors of negative 12 that make the b value. So here it looks like there isn't a b value. It's a leading coefficient of the x term. So in this case it's 1. We don't write it if it's just x. So what are the factors of 12 that when you add them together make 1? And again, we're going to check our signs. This last term is negative, so I need a positive number and a negative number to multiply to get a negative in the end. So I'm looking for a positive and a negative factor that's going to give me a positive 1. So I can run through it again. I can say 1 and 12, I'm not going to get 1. 2 and 6, I'm not going to get 1. 3 and 4, I could get 1. I got to make sure it's positive 1. So I would want a positive 4 and a negative 3. So negative 3 times positive 4 is going to give me this negative 12, which was a times c. And then that's equivalent, the sum is the equivalent to the b value. So what you're going to do is you're going to split the middle term. So instead of writing in factors right away, I'm going to write an x with a negative 3. I'm going to write an x with a positive 4. So I get 2x squared. I keep my quadratic term. Now I split my middle. So I do minus 3x plus 4x. Negative 3 came from this factor. Positive 4 came from that factor. And then I keep my c value, my last term, minus 6, still equals 0. And then what you do is you break it into groups. You're going to factor by grouping. So I'm going to put parentheses around the first two terms, parentheses around the last two terms, and you factor each group. 2x squared and negative 3x have an x in common, so I'm going to take the greatest common factor from each term, so an x can come out. I get 2x minus 3. And then over here, I have a 4 and a 6. Greatest common factor is 2. I'm going to take a 2 out, positive 2. You get 2x minus 3. What I'm looking for is a common factor between both terms, which I got. So I'm going to factor 2x minus 3. If if I factor this out of both of these terms, I'm left with x plus 2. This was equal to 0, this is still equal to 0. So now I have my two factors, and I'm going to use a zero product property. This has to be equal to 0, this has to be equal to 0, and I solve for x. 2x minus 3 equals 0, x plus 2 equals 0. Add 3 to both sides. 2x equals 3, divided by 2. X equals 3 halves, and we love fractions, so we're just going to leave it as x equals 3 halves. And then this one, I'm going to subtract 2 from both sides. X equals negative 2. So my two solutions from 2x squared plus x equals 6 are x equals 3 halves and x equals negative 2.